They say that war never truly ends. That even when the guns fall silent, something lingers on the fields where men were torn apart. In the hills above Arden Valley, Pennsylvania, there is an old military training ground that was decommissioned after World War II. Officially, it's just abandoned property. But for decades, locals have whispered about what really happened there. About a platoon of soldiers who marched into the woods during a midnight drill and never returned. No bodies were ever found, no answers ever given. And on foggy nights, hikers swear they can still hear boots crunching through the leaves. Voices calling roll in the darkness, and the cold breath of something unseen. This isn't just a ghost story. This is a reminder that some sacrifices are never laid to rest. In October of 1972, a freelance journalist named Daniel Harris arrived in Arden Valley with a tape recorder and a single purpose: to uncover what really happened to the missing men of Echo Company. Daniel was 36 years old, a veteran himself, though he'd never seen combat. His father, Lieutenant Thomas Harris, had trained recruits on that ridge in the final months of 1944, and he'd always sworn that something was wrong up there, something he could never explain. Daniel parked his truck at the edge of the overgrown trail. The old wooden sign was still nailed to the trees, the paint barely legible. Echo Ridge Training Grounds, restricted access. He stepped out into the chill autumn air, feeling the hush settle around him. No birdsong, no wind, just the soft, steady drip of moisture from the trees. He turned on his recorder. October 14th, 1972. Echo Ridge perimeter. No visible signs of recent entry, beginning investigation. He shouldered his pack and began the climb up the trail, toward whatever waited in the fog. The first mile was unremarkable. Fallen leaves, half-buried shell casings from training exercises, empty ration tins rusting in the undergrowth. But near the old barracks foundation, he found something that made his pulse spike. A line of boot prints, crisp, unmistakable, like they'd been pressed into the mud just hours ago. He crouched down, touching the edge of a print. Still damp, too fresh to be decades old. Daniel swallowed. Echo Ridge has been abandoned since 1946, he whispered into the recorder. But these tracks are recent. Size suggests standard-issue combat boots. His father's voice came back to him, low and haunted. If you hear the cadence, son, don't answer. Just walk away. Daniel rose slowly. In the silent woods, he could almost imagine the footsteps still echoing. Daniel forced himself to keep moving. The boot prints led away from the old barracks, curving along a narrow path that climbed deeper into the ridge. Every few yards, he stopped to press the recorder's button with shaking fingers. October 14th, 2:17 p.m. I'm following a clear trail of footprints. They appear to move in formation, 2 parallel lines. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Even the crows seemed to avoid this place. Half an hour later, he reached a clearing he recognized from his father's field maps. Once, it had been the site of the final live fire exercises before Echo Company shipped out to Europe. Now, it was just a ring of mossy stones and collapsed sandbags. But someone had been here. Lying in the center of the clearing was a helmet, olive drab, battered by time. The liner was missing, and a dark stain covered the inside rim. Daniel crouched beside it, stomach turning. He gently turned it over and froze. On the underside of the brim, someone had carved a name. He knew that name. Sergeant Henry Lucas had led the training drills his father had always spoken of in hushed tones. Lucas had been among the missing. Daniel's hand trembled as he set the helmet down. "This is evidence," he whispered. "No record ever confirmed Lucas died here. But this proves he never left." The wind sighed through the trees. The leaves rustled, and for a moment he thought he heard a voice. "Harris." His heart stopped. It hadn't been his imagination. It had come from the trees to his left. Daniel turned slowly, scanning the dense trunks and undergrowth. Nothing moved. He lifted the recorder again, voice raw. "I'm hearing voices. A male voice. It just spoke my name." Suddenly the whisper came again, clearer this time. "Corporal Harris, fall in." His father's rank, not his own. The cold pressed in around him. Some part of his mind screamed to run. But he took a step toward the trees. That was when the cadence began. It was soft at first, like a memory carried on the wind. But it grew louder, taking shape. Boots striking earth in perfect rhythm. Left, right, left, right. Dozens of footfalls approaching through the fog. Daniel's breath came in shallow bursts. He raised his flashlight, shining it between the trees. Movement. Figures in faded uniforms. Helmets low over eyeless faces. The first row stepped into the clearing, rifles slung over their shoulders. Each man's expression blank, their skin gray with the pallor of old death. And in the middle of them stood Sergeant Lucas. His jaw hung slack, and from the dark hollow of his mouth, the voice emerged. "Corporal Harris, report for duty." Daniel stumbled back, the recorder slipping from his hand into the leaves. The soldiers kept marching forward, boots thudding in perfect time. Daniel couldn't move. The formation of soldiers had stopped at the edge of the clearing. Rows of hollow faces stared through him, as if he were no more than another tree in their path. The fog had thickened, swirling around their boots and drifting up past their helmets. It seemed to muffle every sound, except for the steady cadence of their breathing. Raspy, dry, like wind dragging across bone. Sergeant Lucas tilted his head slightly. His mouth didn't move, but his voice echoed inside Daniel's skull. "Report, Corporal Harris." Daniel's lips parted. He didn't understand why, but his body felt compelled to answer. Like the decades of discipline drilled into these men reached across time to claim him. "I'm not Corporal Harris," he managed to whisper. A low collective sigh passed through the ranks. Then Lucas's voice again, more insistent. "Corporal Harris, fall in." Daniel's vision blurred at the edges. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the pull. His father had warned him, "If you hear the cadence, don't respond. Don't look them in the eye. Just walk away." But he hadn't listened. And now, here he was, alone on Echo Ridge, staring into the past. And the past was staring back. He tried to step backward. His boots felt glued to the ground. One of the soldiers, tall, thin, a private with a torn sleeve, lifted a hand and pointed at Daniel's chest. Something in Daniel's mind buckled. 1,000 images crashed over him. Men crouched in foxholes, rain pouring from a black sky. A whistle cutting through the dark. Rifles raised. Orders barked and lost in the roar of artillery. His body trembled with a cold he couldn't shake. And beneath it all, a single conviction. These men had never stopped fighting. The fog shifted. More figures emerged from the trees, surrounding the clearing in a wide ring. There were too many to count. 50, maybe more. All dressed in the same tattered uniforms, all staring with the same empty eyes. A pulse of dread settled in Daniel's chest. He realized what they were doing. "They're forming a perimeter," he whispered to no one. Sergeant Lucas stepped forward. When he did, the others moved in unison, closing the circle. Daniel's heartbeat thundered. He searched desperately for any gap, any path of escape, but there was none. Lucas's voice rose above the others, clear, cold, inevitable. "Corporal Harris, we are incomplete." Daniel shook his head, tears streaking his face. "I'm not him. I swear he was my father." But the soldiers took another step closer. Boots pressed into the damp leaves. The circle grew tighter. "Fall in." His father's words rang in his mind one last time. "If you stay too long, they'll think you belong." Daniel's gaze fell on the helmet he'd found earlier, lying in the grass near his boot. Its shadow stretched toward him like a hand. If he picked it up, if he took one step closer, he knew he'd never leave this place. Daniel's breath came in shallow gasps. He could feel the circle tightening around him, an invisible rope cinching closer with each heartbeat. He looked from one face to the next, searching for any flicker of humanity. But their eyes were blank. The eyes of men who had waited too long to be remembered. Sergeant Lucas stepped forward again. The fog coiled around his shoulders like a living thing. His voice filled the clearing, layered over itself in a dozen broken echoes. "Fall in. Corporal Harris." Daniel tried to turn away. His boots refused to move. Some part of him, some deep, frightened place, wanted to obey. Because in that moment, standing alone before the company of the dead, he felt a terrible clarity. They were offering him a place, a purpose, a way to belong. His mind flashed back to childhood, sitting at the kitchen table, listening to his father whisper things he never shared with anyone else. "Sometimes," his father had said, "I dream I'm still up there, marching through the dark. And when I wake up, it feels like part of me never came back." Daniel understood now. Echo Ridge hadn't let go of his father, and it wasn't going to let go of him either, unless he chose to break free. He swallowed hard, blinking away tears. His gaze fell to the recorder lying in the grass, the red light still blinking. Evidence. Proof that what he was seeing wasn't just in his head. If he left now, he could bring the truth to the world. But if he stayed, he felt it again, that strange, hollow peace, the promise that he would never have to be alone again. A final whisper slid across the fog. "We are incomplete. You will complete us." Daniel closed his eyes. His father's voice spoke in his memory, calm, firm. "Son, you have to decide who you are. No one else can do it for you." He forced his hands to unclench, to let go of the longing that had wrapped around his heart, the longing to belong to something, even in death. When he opened his eyes, the circle of soldiers had stopped moving, waiting. He took one ragged breath. "I'm not part of you," he said softly. "I'm leaving." The fog shivered. The figures seemed to waver, as if the world itself had gone unsteady. Daniel bent, grabbed the recorder, and took one step back, then another. Sergeant Lucas's empty gaze followed him. The voices rose in a low, sorrowful chorus. "Stay!" He turned and ran. Branches slapped his face. His lungs burned. But he didn't stop. Behind him, the cadence began again. Boots striking earth, a march without end. But this time, the sound was fading, growing distant. Until finally, there was only the rustle of leaves and the ragged pulse in his ears. Daniel didn't stop running until the trail finally widened and the tree line broke. His legs nearly buckled as he stumbled onto the old gravel lot where his truck was parked. For a moment, he leaned against the door, eyes squeezed shut. The silence pressed against him, heavy and expectant. He half expected the soldiers to emerge from the fog behind him, still marching, still calling his father's name. But when he looked back, there was nothing but the trees. The wind finally stirred through the branches as if the world had been holding its breath. Inside the truck, Daniel sat motionless for a long time, clutching the recorder to his chest. He rewound the tape with shaking fingers. He pressed play. Static hissed from the tiny speaker. Then, soft but clear, a voice. "Corporal Harris, fall in." His breath caught. Proof. It wasn't just in his head. He reached into his pack and pulled out the battered helmet he'd found in the clearing. His reflection stared back from the dull metal. "I'm not part of you," he whispered again. But the words sounded uncertain even to him. Daniel drove away as dawn began to lighten the horizon. He didn't look back. In town, he called a local historian, explaining everything he'd found, every detail of the encounter. But when he offered to hand over the helmet and the tape, there was a long silence on the line. "Mr. Harris," the man said finally, "you'd do well to forget that place. Echo Ridge has a way of remembering those who remember it." Daniel hung up without replying. He understood. Some stories were bigger than any one man's need for answers. For weeks afterward, Daniel dreamed of the ridge, of the rows of soldiers standing in the fog, of their hollow faces turning toward him as one. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he would jolt awake, certain he heard the cadence again, boots striking the earth in unison. Each time he would press his hand against the recorder under his pillow, just to feel something solid and real. But even that comfort began to fade. Because he knew, deep down, some part of him had never really left the ridge. Years later, long after he stopped talking about what he'd seen, Daniel would still find himself standing alone in the dark, listening. And he would remember the feeling that had almost swallowed him, the quiet, insidious desire to belong, no matter the cost. We like to believe the past is just that, past. We tell ourselves that the dead can't reach us, that the footprints fade with time. But sometimes, the places we think we've left behind are the ones that never stop following us. If you ever find yourself standing in a place no one else dares to go, listening to voices only you can hear, ask yourself, is this the truth you came for, or is it the place that came for you? Curiosity is a gift and a curse. It can illuminate the darkest corners of history, but it can also bind you to things you were never meant to find. Some stories don't need an audience. Some echoes don't want to be silenced. And when you choose to chase them, you must be ready to pay the price.